All right, government students, 3.2 virtual notes here for Mr. Schmoody's government class. Today we're going to be talking about the media, all right, specifically what's role does the media play in society today and how can we use the media to stay informed on current events, which is a challenge when you start to look at everything going on today. So let's get into it. So the media, when in a democratic society, okay, the media is extremely important. The media, when we're talking about media, we're talking about any independent communication organization. This is anyone that is not a part of the government, so they are not government owned, okay? But they are any communication organization, and they're going to be responsible for a number of different things, okay? And it kind of depends on what they are, okay? They can inform the public. This is what we call journalists. So a lot of your news organizations, specifically news reporting organizations, are going to be like this, things like BBC, CBS, NBC. Okay? There's going to be media outlets that might interpret information. This is what we call pundits. Okay? We'll get into that a little bit more later. This would be places like CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, where they're not just reporting on what things are, but they're also going into, hey, this is what this means if you're a conservative. This is what this means if you're a liberal, right? And they're beginning to interpret information and kind of telling the public, hey, this is what you should be thinking about these types of things. And then there's also a part of the media that is really focused not so much on news reporting, and to some extent they are, but they're very much focused on informing and instructing the public by developing public knowledge, okay? By helping grow the overall understanding of certain issues when it comes to the public. This would be things like NPR, National Public Radio, PBS, right, Public Broadcasting Station, Discovery Channel, things like that, where they're trying to develop public knowledge. And this can take a lot of different forms. This can be newspapers, this can be television, internet websites, magazines, radio stations, any type of news, like media communication it can be using these forms to try and get you to understand what's going on and inform you of things. Media has always been really important in American society. If you look at the very First Amendment, right, one of the protections is freedom of the press. And they understood, our founding fathers understood at the creation of our nation, that a free press is essential to a healthy democracy. If you don't have a free press, you are no longer going to have a democracy after long. Okay? Because as soon as the government gets to censor everything, it gets to tell the public, hey, you can report this, but you can't report this, it begins to lose its democratic ideas, and all of a sudden the government's taking more and more control. Okay? Because what the media does, it allows us to have access to information. Okay? It allows us to make informed decisions when it comes to issues. As Thomas Jefferson had put it, our liberty depends on the freedom of the press, and it cannot be limited without being lost. John Adams, okay, in 1780 said something similar. The liberty of the press is essential to the security of the state. Okay, and these are guys who are on about as opposite ends of the political spectrum as you can possibly be. Right? We kind of talked a little bit about that feud between Hamilton and Jefferson beforehand. Okay, Jefferson, Democratic Republican. John Adams was a member of the Federalist Party, our second president. Jefferson was his VP, and they absolutely hated each other. Right? Actually, hated might not be strong enough. Loathe, revile, just absolutely just despised each other. Okay? But on this particular issue of the media and a free press, they agree. They agree that it is essential to our country. Okay? With that today, there's a lot of challenges when it comes to the media. Okay? Especially our role, because it's not like the media previously. Where they were trying to inform you, maybe back in the 50s and 60s and such, with Walter Cronkite and some of these other great news reporters. What has happened today is politics has crept into the media, and you have different organizations and different groups, and there's a lot more easy access with things like the internet to media outlets promoting particular viewpoints. Okay, and a lot of times those viewpoints and the information that's coming out of them conflict with one another. And we have to try and navigate through this, I guess, kind of ice field and trying to not be like the Titanic and hit an iceberg and sink. Okay? And some of the challenges that we're now facing as citizens here in the United States, whether you're Democrat, whether you're Republican, doesn't matter, is these three things, right? We have to constantly worry about media bias and framing. How are the media putting out stories? We have to worry about this whole idea of fake news. right? President Trump likes to use that a lot, fake news, but there's actual like false reporting out there going on today where fake news is an actual issue, and where these information's coming from. Like, what's the origins of these particular stories that are being published? So that's one of the challenges. So when it comes to media bias and framing, okay, there are certain outlets that tend to be more neutral with this. There are a lot of them that aren't. And understanding where somebody's perspective is coming from is really, really helpful in developing an informed opinion on a particular issue. Okay, so one of the issues we've got to look out for is this idea of media bias. Okay, media bias is this tendency of a media organization to lean in favor of a particular idea, right, or a particular ideology, whether that maybe be as more conservative, more liberal, and the such. And what some of these media outlets do is they tend to only present issues from that one particular perspective. They're not showing you both sides of the story. And a lot of times, especially as we get into more not news reporting, but into areas where now we're starting to form opinions on that news and that particular event, when we're starting to get to complex analysis or even simple analysis, you're starting to get away from these are the facts, and they're starting to get into these are opinions on the facts. Okay. And sometimes those opinions are leaving out key details because it doesn't fit with their particular narrative. And that becomes a big challenge. Often the groups either trying to frame arguments in such a particular way to try and gate supporters from viewers. I don't know, on the bottom here I have Obamacare versus the Affordable Care Act, right? Even just that particular name evokes certain responses, right? To a conservative, you go and start talking about Obamacare, and they're going to say, "Well, no, I don't like it at all. It's Obama," right? But then you could ask them, "Well, what do you think about the Affordable Care Act?" And they may have a different idea, right? You can do this exact same kind of thing to liberals. They might look and say, "Well, I prefer Obamacare because Obama." But if you're an informed voter, you look at these issues and say, "Well, it's the same thing." Right? Obamacare is a nickname for the Affordable Care Act. So framing the argument in particular ways can kind of get people off track and maybe distort away from what the actual facts are and try to get into more kind of the partisan feelings on certain things. Okay? On the right here, I have Ben Shapiro. He is a really brilliant guy, very brilliant conservative talk show host, and really, really well known for debating a lot of college students. He's a big advocate for conservatives on college campuses and saying, look, universities, you're not doing enough to promote conservative voices on campus. And if you look around a lot of college campuses today, he may have a point with that. So he's a particular individual that a lot of conservatives, especially younger conservatives, tend to listen to. When it comes to fake news, right? When we're talking about fake news, we're not talking about it in the same kind of sense that Trump was talking about it. We're instead talking about it in stories that are actually containing misleading or false information, that are creating confusion, that are creating misunderstanding on a lot of important issues. Some of these may be containing half-truths, so part of the information there is true, but part of it's false, or simply it's just flat out fake. It's just not accurate at all. Okay, and what happens is with this fake news that's going on in some places, it starts to erode trust in our democracy, right? We no longer feel like we can trust the media. We can no longer feel like we can believe the things that we're reading and seeing. And instead, it starts to get us into the situation where we fall into partisanship. We tend to believe only what we think should be the case. And it does have some really, really real world consequences. And we'll kind of talk about those in class. So, news sources. Where you get your news from matters, because not all news sources are equal. Okay? There are very, very different levels in quality, right? If you have just a one-person organization that's trying to put out information, that's not going to be necessarily very high quality because it doesn't go through any type of review process. There's no editor that's trying to help make sure that things are factual and such like that. There's not as much standards with things. Whereas if you go to some of those larger news organizations, you have structures in place that are trying to make sure things are factual. I'm not bashing on like individual things, like don't get me wrong, there are a lot of individual journalists who do a lot of good things. but it's just where understanding that, like where you get your information from matters. Okay, social media especially is full of misinformation. All right, it is full of false stories because anybody can post anything, right? And it's so easy to just simply post for somebody to just post something all of a sudden for it to go viral, especially if it kind of is playing off the partisan passions of people. Okay? And there's a lot of these organizations, especially social organizations, that are kind of looking at ways like how do we begin to combat false or misleading information. So this has kind of led to the rise of political fact checkers and such. Okay? Different organizations also maybe have some media bias prevalent in them. They may have a particular conservative lean or a liberal lean and tend to promote that particular ideology. Understanding what that is can be really helpful, though, as you start to critically examine those particular issues. And we'll kind of talk more about that in class. And on top of that, there are a lot of organizations now, even news organizations, that are more concerned with breaking a story and being the first ones to leak it than to actually fact check it before they do, right? And as a result of that, you're getting partial information. You're getting maybe only part of the story, or you're getting information that hasn't been fully fact checked and hasn't been confirmed and corroborated with other evidence. And that becomes a little bit of an issue when it comes to legitimacy, right? I got a good old Abe Lincoln here on the side that says, don't believe everything you read on the internet, right? Lincoln wasn't around when the internet was invented. So, you know, a little idea there. So let's talk journalists versus pundits here real quick. So journalists are individuals who investigate, research, or write and report the news. These are news reporters, okay? Don't confuse them with pundits. And pundits are individuals who give their opinion, right? They talk about a particular story and they say, all right, this is what I think about it, and this is what you should be thinking about it. Okay? A lot of times these opinions are not always backed up by facts. Right? It is an opinion, and you should be more critical of it because it's opinion, whether that's coming from a conservative or a liberal, right? Individuals like Sean Hannity, the late Rush Limbaugh, Charles Matthews, Rachel Maddow, Tucker Carlson, these are all pundits. And understanding the difference between a journalist who's trying to do investigative reporting, all right, and break news and report on news versus somebody who's giving their opinion is really helpful as you start to try and become a more informed voter. Okay? Last thing we're going to talk about echo chambers. Okay? This is happening a lot today, both on the liberal side and the conservative side. And it's all based around this idea of confirmation bias, right? Where we as human beings have a natural tendency to seek out things and seek out people, information that supports what we already believe. Okay? So a news story breaks, and we're looking at it and saying, I believe this because it fits my worldview. I believe this because it fits what I already believe. Right? And if you do this repeatedly, you get what's called an echo chamber effect. It's like you go into a cave, right, or under an overpass, and you go, hello, and you hear, hello, hello, hello. Yeah, you get enough of these people, all right, who all hold the same political ideology in a particular room, and you get them all talking. And you know what happens? All of a sudden, they're all agreeing with each other, and they're reinforcing their own ideas, even if those ideas might not be fully true. So you could be careful of the echo chamber effect, where you get amplification of particular beliefs based in that particular political ideology. So that is everything for today. So that's 3.2 virtual notes. We'll talk more about the media as we get into class. So see you there.